Hello, and thank you for joining us for our second program impact video on the Community Development Block Grant Program, or CDBG, at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. These videos are shorter micro-learning sessions designed to provide a deeper dive into programs and funding resources given COVID-19. My name is Kaina Pereira, and I'm the Deputy Director for Business Investment Services, International Affairs and Trade, and the Office of Permit Assistance in the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GO-Biz. A little background about myself is I was formerly a commercial real estate. I had worked as a business consultant for over a decade, and am really engaged in economic development and really just love having the impact that I have on businesses large and small. To begin, we ask that if you have any questions throughout this presentation, to please use the link provided below. Upon submission of a question, you will then be connected with GO-Biz staff, who will share your question with the program contact. All questions and answers will be aggregated into a document to be posted with this video on our website at business.ca.gov. We also want your feedback. We have included a survey link that is intended for you to provide feedback on our videos, webinars, and any other content provided by our office. Lastly, we ask that you share this video and stay connected with us. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the video content. You can also follow our Twitter at @CAGoBiz and subscribe to our GO-Biz newsletter for new video and webinar updates. Links to both our Twitter and newsletter subscription are provided below. Now I'd like to introduce you to Ashley Wolf from the Office of Field Policy and Management in the San Francisco Regional Office at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I'll be turning it over to Ashley to provide an update on the Community Development Block Grant Program.
The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has been honored to partner with the California Governor's Office on many initiatives important to California. We would like to thank the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development for our continued collaboration. Our partnership was established to assist with the 879 opportunity zones in the state of California. HUD's mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality affordable homes for all. The Department of Housing and Urban Development Act of 1965 compels HUD staff to promote the growth of cities and states and efficient and effective use of housing and community and economic development resources. We accomplish this goal by stimulating private sector initiatives, public-private sector partnerships, and public entrepreneurship. This partnership allowed us to quickly adapt and respond to COVID-19 and bring together other federal partners to assist with sharing resources during this pandemic. My name is Ashley Wolf, and I work in HUD's Office of Field Policy and Management in the San Francisco Regional Office. Here in FPM, we work closely with program areas such as the Office of Community Planning and Development, and today I will be sharing information on one of their signature grant programs, the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, which received funding through the CARES Act. Along with my colleagues working with GO-Biz, I'm honored to share the most up-to-date information as of this recording. Our FPM team is your first point of contact for services and general information about HUD's grants, programs, and initiatives. The regional and field offices communicate the priorities and policies of the Secretary and develop community relationships that ensure the success of the Secretary's initiatives and special projects. Our community partnerships also focus on place-based initiatives such as Promise Zones, Opportunity Zones, and Vision Centers, and the expansion of HUD's Section 3 program. HUD's Office of Community Planning and Development, or CPD, works to develop viable communities by promoting integrated approaches that provide decent housing, a sustainable living environment, and expand economic opportunities for low and moderate income persons. CPD administers HUD's block grants, such as the Community Development Block Grants, Emergency Services Grants, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS, and home funding. HUD has 3 offices in California, one in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Santa Ana. However, HUD CPD staff are only located in our San Francisco and Los Angeles office. The key staff in each office consists of the HUD CPD Director, the program managers or team leads, and a CPD representative or CPD rep. Each CPD rep is assigned to a specific grantee, which could be the state of California, a city, or a county. If you have general questions for our HUD CPD staff, you're welcome to send an email to cpdquestionsanswered@hud.gov. This impact video will provide you with information about 5 key areas to increase your knowledge and opportunity to engage with and potentially secure additional funding to address the COVID-19 crisis. First, you will learn about HUD's Community Planning and Development Department and a brief overview of the HUD CDBG program. Second, about CDBG CARES Act funding and the fund's allocation timeline. Third, we will discuss the eligible activities and flexibilities of CDBG funds written into the CARES Act. Fourth, about how to submit and document a CDBG funds waiver to address COVID-19. Finally, we will provide you with a sample checklist for your economic development staff to potentially utilize HUD CDBG CARES Act funds. The first section of this presentation will be focused on providing you with an overview of HUD's Office of Community Planning and Development, along with an overview of HUD's CDBG program. It is important to understand several acronyms that will be used throughout this impact video. CPD, or HUD's Office of Community Planning and Development, CDBG, or Community Development Block Grant Program, and lastly, CDBG-CV, which is the abbreviation for the additional HUD CDBG funding from the CARES Act. Additionally, the CDBG Entitlement Program provides annual grants on a formula basis to entitled cities and counties to develop viable urban communities. HUD uses the term entitlement to describe the entity that has applied for or been awarded block grant funding. The second key takeaway will provide you with information about the CDBG CARES Act funding and the allocation timeline. The CARES Act has allotted a total of $5 billion in supplemental community development block grant funding to directly address COVID-19. The funds will be used for a variety of activities to prevent, prepare, or respond to COVID-19. The CARES Act also provides flexibilities for CDBG grantees to make it easier to use the CARES Act funding, as well as the regular CDBG allotments from the fiscal year 2019 and 2020. There are waivers and alternate requirements to help grantees be as flexible as possible as the situation changes rapidly. An important note regarding the CDBG-CV funding is that if there are other funds that are provided to grantees to pay for specific activities, that money should be used first before CDBG-CV funding. This will help grantees prevent duplication of benefits. The order of funding is as follows: appropriation, funds allocation, funds reservation, and lastly, funds awarded. Currently, we are in the allocation period and CDBG-CV funds have not yet been distributed. However, grantees have been authorized to incur pre-award costs against their CDBG-CV allocations. This is a more detailed visual of the $5 billion in CDBG-CV funding. There are different formulas that break down how the funding will be allocated around the country. The CARES Act was enacted on March 27, 2020. On April 2, 2020, $2 billion was allocated as part of the CDBG-CV funds. These funds were distributed based on the existing fiscal year 2020 formula and given to entitlement cities, counties, and directly to states. The funding allocation amounts to each jurisdiction is located on a spreadsheet on HUD's website that will be shared on the next slide. By May 11, 2020, more funding allocations will be announced, totaling $1 billion, given only to states and insular areas. The funding allocations will be based on a new formula to be determined. Finally, the remaining $2 billion in funding will be made available on a rolling basis under a new to-be-determined formula that will be based on needs and at the discretion of HUD Secretary. Of the CARES Act CDBG-CV funding allocated on April 2nd, California received approximately $235.3 million, or 11.8% of the $2 billion of CDBG-CV funding allocated nationwide. The funding was provided directly to entitlement cities, entitlement counties, and lastly, directly to the State of California's Office of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. Eligible applicants for the funding directly from the state include 1. Non-entitlement jurisdictions, 2. Non-federally recognized Native American communities, and 3. Colonia, as defined by the National Affordable Housing Act of 1990. At the bottom of the slide is a link to HUD's website that includes two Excel files. One, the federal fiscal year 2020 CDBG funding, and two, the CARES Act funding released on April 2nd. The third talking point of this impact video discusses the eligible activities and flexibilities with HUD CDBG federal fiscal year 2019 and 2020 funding and the new CDBG-CV funding. The CDBG-CV funding must be used to prevent, prepare, or respond to the coronavirus pandemic. These are the four broad categories that the funding can be used for related to infectious disease response. The first is buildings and improvements, including public facilities. An example could be rehabilitating a community facility to establish an infectious disease treatment clinic. The second is the provision of new or quantifiably increased public services. An example of this could be carrying out job training to expand the pool of healthcare workers and technicians that are available to treat disease within a community. The third use is for planning, capacity building, and technical assistance. However, it is important to note that this is mostly for CDBG-CV funding that has been given directly to states, not entitlement cities. States can provide funding to local governments in the form of planning grants and can also use the funding to help local governments hire TA providers to deliver CDBG training for new recipients and local government departments that are administering these funds for the first time. However, entitlement communities can use funding to gather data and develop non-project specific emergency infectious disease response plans. And lastly, the fourth, assistance to businesses, including special economic development assistance. As mentioned in the previous slide, the funding can be used as assistance to businesses, including special economic development assistance. Eligible activities include new business or business expansion. Examples include providing grants or loans to support new businesses or expanding businesses to create jobs and manufacture medical supplies necessary to respond to infectious disease. Next is short-term working capital to small businesses. Examples include providing short-term working capital assistance to small businesses to enable job retention. And lastly, establishing, stabilizing, and expanding micro-enterprises. Examples include working with micro-entrepreneurs that provide medical, food delivery, cleaning, and other services to support home health and quarantine. A neighborhood revitalization strategy area, or NRSA, is a community development block grant grantee's designated area targeted for revitalization. A NRSA is different from other local targeted areas in that the designation is reviewed and approved by HUD. Promise zones and choice neighborhoods located within a jurisdiction that is actively implementing comprehensive community revitalization and meeting boundary and demographic requirements will be presumed to meet the above criteria, and HUD CPD will automatically approve the NRSA designation. Although HUD's approval of a NRSA designation does not result in additional CDBG resources, it does provide for substantial benefits through various regulatory flexibilities that are shown at the bottom of this slide. It is important to note that 70% of CDBG funding must directly benefit low to moderate income individuals, and by utilizing these designated areas, it is assumed the funding is being spent on the target population. These are the flexibilities included in the CARES Act related to CDBG funding. The first is the Public Services Activities Cap. This cap normally is at 15% and has been eliminated. However, it is important to note that any funding used over the 15% for public services must be for services that directly prevent, prepare, or respond to infectious diseases. The second is the citizen participation and public hearing for consolidated plans. If plans need to be amended and require a public hearing or public comments, the public must be provided with at least 5 days notice and may include a virtual town hall. Additionally, the deadline for consolidated plans for fiscal year 19 and 20 is extended until August 16, 2021. The next discusses the authorization the HUD Secretary has to issue waivers and alternate requirements to aid in expediting services to responding to COVID-19. Lastly, the CARES Act allows grantees to use CDBG-CV funding to reimburse costs incurred by the state or locality, regardless of the date the costs were incurred, as long as the costs comply with CDBG-CV requirements. This is the HUD Community Planning and Development Mega-Waiver. The specific use of this waiver for CDBG grantees is to waive in-person participation when there is an update to the consolidated plan. For more information on this waiver and its uses, please click on the link on this slide. The fourth key takeaway is how HUD CDBG grantees can submit and document their request for a CDBG funds waiver. Recipients wishing to utilize any of the waivers provided in the memorandum must notify their local CPD Director by email of their intent to utilize a specific waiver flexibility 2 days before they anticipate using it. HUD grantees are also encouraged to establish a set of emergency policies and procedures for use during the COVID-19 situation. There are 4 key steps to a HUD CDBG grantee to submit and document a waiver request. Step 1, grantee must notify their HUD local CPD Director. Step 2, there is a waiting period of 2 calendar days after the notification of the waiver is sent to the local CPD Director. Step 3A, utilize the waiver. Step 3B, the recipient needs to document the conditions. And step 4, the client needs to document the use. Here is the link to the HUD CPD Waiver Memorandum dated March 31st, 2020. HUD has email addresses for CPD field offices that recipients can use to direct all waiver requests. Attached to the HUD CPD Waiver Memorandum is a document that provides details on the exact information the recipient must include in their notification. The 5th key takeaway is to help local economic development staff move to action and work with the recipient of CDBG funds and to possibly receive funding for economic development needs as long as the request is for an eligible activity and the funding is available. In order to ensure economic development activity needs during the COVID-19 crisis are being addressed in both the short and long-term recovery, we're providing you with a checklist of action items to take. First, determine if the city or county is a HUD CDBG grantee or a HUD entitlement location. If the city is not a grantee, check to see if the county is a grantee. If not, then the state will cover your location. Second, identify the local government department that administers the CDBG funds. Third, review the CDBG funds eligible activities for infectious disease response and consider working with the local public health authorities. Fourth, identify potential needs of the community that will assist with the response to COVID-19. This includes prioritization of funds based on activities being performed. Finally, be sure to conduct a duplication of benefits analysis and an emergency policy. Fifth, request a meeting with the local department staff that manage the location CDBG funds and present your ideas for needs and uses of CDBG funds for economic development. Sixth, monitor HUD CDBG website for the most current information about CDBG CARES Act funding and be aware of the upcoming allocations. Seventh, continue dialogue with local government department staff regarding future funding needs and uses. On the following 2 slides are lists of resources shared during this webinar and additional resources for reference regarding the HUD CDBG and CDBG-CV funds. Lastly, we encourage you to work directly with your local department that administers the CDBG funds and to work with the local HUD CPD representative. You may also utilize the CPD general email to request more information related to today's discussion. Should you have any additional questions, feel free to contact me and I will direct you to the appropriate parties. On behalf of HUD, we would like to thank GO-Biz for the opportunity to share out this information.
Thank you, Ashley, and the HUD team. Once again, to those watching, if you have any questions for Ashley, you can submit through the link below. You can also provide feedback on this video through the survey link. This video And all future videos will continue to be posted on both our GO-Biz YouTube channel and our COVID-19 page on business.ca.gov. Thank you for joining us for our second program impact video on the Community Development Block Grant Program at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.